The story that we were assigned was The Third Voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. So here are the group names. So we're going to get started. So the background and main story. Antoine Galland, a writer, translated the Thousand and One Nights into French, and at the time period, French was a one of the universal languages, and it was able to become known all over the world, which causes it to still be popular today. The frame story itself is about a sultan, also known as a king, who was very upset with his wife being unfaithful to him, so he decided to kill her. Every day he would get a new wife after that, and the next day at dawn he would kill her because he believed that all women were liars and cheaters. That is until he was able to marry Scheherazade. Scheherazade was very clever, and she decided, I'm not going to let the king kill me tomorrow. So she came up with a plan. Her plan was to tell the king a different story every night, but delay the ending of the story until the next night, in hope that the king's curiosity would keep her alive. Her plan worked, and after she ran out of stories at the end of A Thousand and One Nights, the king decided that he wasn't going to kill her, and they stayed married. One of the stories that is within A Thousand and One Nights is The Third Voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. So Sinbad, who was a rich bachelor from Baghdad, decided to go on a journey. He was bored with his surroundings as a rich man, and he decided to get back out there and get more money. So now we're going to move on to the literary focus. So the third voyage of Sinbad is part of an archetype, and archetypes are patterns in stories that could be a character, a recurring object or symbol, the plot, the setting, anything really. And archetypes are supposed to go over barriers and bring people together through that one object or whatever it may be in order for everyone to be able to connect with it. An example of an archetype could be the concept of a damsel in distress. Now, an example of this would be also another one of the Thousand and One Nights stories, the story of Aladdin, which they made into a Disney movie. So that can show you how an archetype can cause people to connect with it and the story to be known years and years later. So now we're going to move on. Vocabulary. So we have 5 vocab words which are seen here, and you guys can look at them for a few seconds, and then we're going to move on. Okay. So now we're going to go into a summary of the third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. So Sinbad goes on a voyage, like I said earlier, and so he hops on a ship with some merchants. Everything's going well until the wind changes the ship's course, and the captain realizes that they are on course for this terrible island that really doesn't have any good story behind it. The story behind this island is that anyone who has stopped on this island has not been able to make it out alive, so that causes everyone to be frantic. The sailors look toward this island and they see dwarves coming towards them. The dwarves reach the ship and they take it over. I know, dwarves taking over a ship from sailors who are regular height. But anyway, they sail away towards the island and they deposit the sailors. The dwarves get back on the ship and they sail away. So while the sailors are by themselves, they decide, well, we're not just going to stay on this beach. We're going to go find an adequate place to sleep. So they happen upon a palace and they take shelter and sleep there. So before sun sets, a giant shows up. Now, this giant looks especially formidable because he has red eyes, he has fangs, he's already big, and it's already late at night. So he awakens the sailors in fear and it causes them to freeze in fear. So the giant picks up each person and he examines them like a butcher examines meat before he cooks it or cuts it. And he sees the captain. The captain was pretty chubby, and he decided the captain was adequate, so to spare you the gory details, he roasted the captain like a pig and then pulled his skin off like barbecue. Basically, the giant had a good meal, and now he goes to sleep. The sailors are utterly horrified with what they have just seen, and they're talking about avenging their captain. So the next day, while the giant is gone, they come up with a plan. They build a raft, and after they have built the raft and set it near the ocean, the giant comes back. The giant, of course, seizes another of the group and he eats him. So while the giant has started to drift off to sleep, the remaining sailors take iron rods and put them over the fire. And the next thing you know, they're going all Odysseus and Polyphemus on them, and they take the iron spits and plunge them into the giant's eyes. So the sailors take this opportunity and run away to their raft. And they're paddling away into the ocean, and the giant shows back up, and he comes with a person that's just like him, and they begin to throw boulders at the raft, and they kill every person left except for SIndbad and one person. And after that, they just row out of the reach, and that's where the story ends. So now we're going to talk about our response and analysis questions. So question number 1 was basically doing a chart that is basically like the summary. So I'm just going to give you about 10 seconds to look at this, and then we're going to move on to question 2. Okay. So you see question 1 continues right here, but we're going to move on to question 2. With number 2, I'm not really going to go into much detail because it's talking about the archetypal monster who threatens a hero and his people. So we all know that archetypes can connect people all over the world. So it's just saying, how does the monster in this story terrorize the people? So it just, you know how monsters, they eat people, and etc. That's really what number 2 is talking about. So now we're going to move on to number 3. Number 3 is talking about how the storyteller makes the giant seem disgusting, and how does cannibalism affect this viewpoint. So the storyteller starts off by describing features that aren't particularly human, like red eyes and fangs, and giving him animalistic characteristics makes us fear the giant, because when these animalistic characteristics that it's being given is characteristics of animals that are in attack mode, which we tend to get away from. So also when you talk about cannibalism, that is something that we as humans don't tolerate, especially human cannibalism. Because think about it. If you live in a world of human cannibalism, can you really be safe? Because you can tell someone, go do this at the store, but you don't know if they're going to come back. So that's something as humans that we're uncomfortable with because we know that it makes us vulnerable and unsafe. So with number 4, we're talking about how storytellers today use monster archetypes. So again, with archetypes, I'm not going to go into much detail with this because we already know about this monster slaying archetype that was seen in the Odyssey and Beowulf and this story and other stories. So we're just going to go into how screenwriters today view monster archetypes. So there's an example in the Transformers franchise. There's an example there could be an example in the Men in Black franchise also, because in both of these franchises you see that the monster or monsters in this case are really just trying to get rid of humans, and they eat humans and they terrorize humans just for their own gain, not necessarily for any actual reason. And that's number 4. So, number 5 is talking about why do you think the 1001 Nights has been popular for so many years? We believe that it's still popular now because it has lots of different stories that you can read. Like, you don't necessarily have to read all of them at one point, and they all have different things to learn from them. And they also have different literary tools embedded in them. For example, we're going to talk about archetypes again. So, in the third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor, you learn about archetypes and how you can use a monster and relate it to another story about a monster because they both have the same qualities and whatnot. And because you can relate it to other stories, it's more entertaining than reading a story that is not related to anything at all. So that's number 5 in summary. Number 6 is talking about how the monster in this story, The Third Voyage of Sinbad the Sailor, compared to the monsters that challenged Beowulf and Gilgamesh. So, just like in this story, in Beowulf, the monster Grendel eats humans. So, that makes them both kind of really bad. And that tactic is used to make the monster seem extremely formidable because, as we talked about earlier in question number 3 about human cannibalism making people feel unsafe. Also, all 3 of the monsters were really gargantuan. Like, they were displayed as giants or just bigger than their human heroes. So that can just bring all 3 stories together, just to also go on with archetypes, how they kind of all had the same, not appearance, but the same reputation. And lastly, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the monster Humbaba was also having immense size, just like the monster in the third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. I couldn't say that about Beowulf's monster because if Beowulf was able to beat Grendel with his bare hands, he couldn't have been too much bigger. And that is the third voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. Thank you for your time.